Okay, well, as you can see, Martin has now joined me and joined us for the live Q&A. So firstly, welcome, Martin.
Thanks for having me, Liam. Good to see you.
You too. And thank you for providing presentation. And I already see a number of questions are coming through from our audience on what you presented there. So I will dive into some of these questions as discussion unfolds. But firstly, I have a couple of questions around some of your work and maybe to provide some more an overview and some clarity on some of the stuff you do. So you're on the site, you list a number of services in this space, two being the plan for zero and the second being forecast for zero. Two areas that we at Reuters events here are big challenges for businesses right now. So can you maybe share some of the challenges, issues that you're seeing, some regular issues that you see with your clients, and then I suppose more importantly, some of the solutions that you've helped find?
Absolutely. So at EcoAct, we very much focus on the sort of journey from A to zero, and those early stages around the sort of planning and the forecasting really are about sort of getting the engagement and the buy-in from sort of senior stakeholders within the business, and really working out what that sort of strategy is. I think it's very easy historically for sort of climate change and sustainability issues to be off to the side, but we very much believe that climate action needs to make commercial sense. So if you don't sort of engage the key individuals within the business, if you don't come up with a plan for action that sort of recognizes your broader sort of commercial objectives and so on, then you're not going to get the full value from that. So really it's about sort of understanding what the drivers are for each business. Every business is different. Every business needs to sort of tackle this in a way that aligns to that, and sort of coming up with something that's going to work. And then the sort of forecasting side is recognizing that you need to look at not only where you are today, but where your business is going to be in sort of 5-10 years down the road. The world is changing, and so the world that we're going to be in terms of the physical risks, the transition risks, and so on, we need to be looking at those now in order to get that strategy right.
You mentioned the forecasting aspect there, and data is critical to both the forecasting of potential transitions and impacts, but also where companies are now. Understanding you need to understand where you are before you can understand where you can go. So, and the measurement piece is can be a big struggle for companies. We heard some discussions earlier on today where talking to the importance of greater I suppose clarity and scrutiny and verifiable data. But when you start getting down to tier 2, tier 3 of supply chains, that can become quite hard, especially for large corporations that have tens of thousands of suppliers in amongst it. So, I suppose in short, how can you guys help on that? How can you guys help on this?
Sure. No, it's a really good question, and sort of I guess the context I'd give is that we just haven't had to look at this data for these sorts of purposes historically. So the systems and the processes that we have around them, they don't really speak to the sort of climate change type impacts. So it's really a question of sort of evolution, and you kind of have to learn to walk before you can run. Particularly if you're talking about sort of multi-billion-dollar supply chains and very complex supply chains in terms of the tier 1, tier 2, tier 3. You're going to start with higher levels of estimation, but then off the back of that, you'll get a sense of where some of the heat spots are, and then you can sort of drill into those in more detail. I actually come from sort of more of a financial markets background originally myself, and when I first moved over into this space, this question about how do we get this data seemed to be a really challenging one, but actually companies already have a lot of the information that they need. It's about just adding on that sort of climate change emissions layer to it. So it is an evolution, and things do iterate and improve over time. But you have to sort of start asking these questions in the first instance, and then you can get into some of the more complex areas about tier 2, tier 3, and so on. But it's absolutely possible. We have multiple clients that have gone through that journey and are now sort of getting increasingly sophisticated systems for understanding not only their sort of supply chain, but you're going down to the level of an individual product and every step in that journey. So it's absolutely possible. It just requires the will and the focus, and again back to that sort of senior stakeholder commitment that this is an area that needs to be tackled.
And I've just pulled up some of the questions we've got from the audience, and a question I suppose is maybe similar, or the other side of the same coin is around Scopefree. Is hardest set of emissions. They put a hardest set of emissions to measure, maybe I suppose for their business. Any words of advice? They haven't stated which business they are, but any words of advice based on what you've done when looking at the Scopefree emissions?
Well, I think the first point is to start looking at it. So I think it's a great question, and there hasn't been that regulatory focus on Scope 3, but I think increasingly investors are alive to the fact that that's where all of the risk is. For many businesses, up to 80% and beyond that of the impact can reside in that Scope 3. So depending on your business, the sort of data that you're talking about, the area that you need to focus on is going to be different, whether it's around your supply chain or your investment portfolio, the use of your products and so on. So again, back to that journey, start with the data that you have. I think that's always the easiest starting point. There's various approaches in terms of being able to derive estimates from that data. So we might be looking at sort of headline data around spend in the first instance, or the amount of monetary value of the investments and so on. But once you've got that initial sort of more estimated view, you can then start to focus on the key suppliers, on the key investments, on the key products, and start to substitute some of that more estimated data with more actual data as a key part of sort of improving your understanding, and then ultimately driving emissions down, working with those various parties to see what you can do differently to help reduce those impacts.
Okay, and someone else, we've got anonymous is quite popular on the question, so we've got three anonymous here, but on the Q&A, but I'm assuming it's not the same person, but maybe different. But one of the questions here, you showed a slide of 40% of UK companies committed to net zero. Another graph showed 1,000 companies in June 2020. I suppose it's a bit of clarity around some of the information you presented in that 15-minute recording. So is that, is the 1,000 companies in June 2020, is that the 45% of all UK companies?
Sure. Yeah. Apologies if the slide wasn't clear on that. It's 45% of the FTSE 100 has committed to net zero. So that's 45 companies at least. Our research, this was coming from our sustainability reporting performance research, where we look at the FTSE 100, the CAC 40, the IBEX 35, and the Dow Jones. So that 45% was just for the FTSE 100. The north of 1,000 figure is the global figure of companies that have committed to science-based targets as a key part of delivering that sort of net zero journey, that net zero roadmap. So more companies than 45 have signed up to net zero. As I say, that's just for the FTSE 100 figure, but it's a growing number. If you look at the charts here, every year we're looking at exponential growth really on these sorts of commitments.
Yeah, well, we saw earlier today the New Climate Institute, as part of a panel with the UNFCCC, they launched a new report, and you could see, as you say, the exponential growth in the commitments and the companies. And there was actually an interesting slide which showed by industry how many companies had committed and what was left. And there was some really, I suppose you could look at either way. One, there's a lot of opportunity there, but one where there's a number of companies that have, a big swathe of the industry hasn't committed. But then maybe on the flip side, that a lot haven't committed. So why isn't that the case? So before we went live, we were talking through and talking about how busy we are and stuff. And are you seeing any particular industries? Are they standout industries for you guys coming to you with kind of that ambition, with that going, hey, we want to work with you on this, how can you help? Is there any standout industries that seem to be more engaging from your perspective?
Sure. I think multiple industries are responding to this, and that's the great sort of story in here, that it's not just any one single industry that's sort of leading the charge. I think there are certain things that are really acting as tipping points. Again, we were talking about that just before we went live. So something at TCFD, for example, the Task Force for Climate-Related Financial Disclosure, that's got a big focus for large organisations, and notably in the financial services sector. I think they're really starting to act on this as well. So I think we've got sessions earlier on today about ESG that we've talked about as well. So again, recognising that sort of risk to investments, to portfolios, to the financial sector overall, and sort of flipping the question of sort of climate change. Really, it's not so much about how companies are impacting climate change, but increasingly about how climate change is going to impact those companies. So I think that new language to talk about these issues is absolutely key, because you're talking about sort of emissions and scopes of emissions. There's a lot of abstract language out there, but if you're sort of asking the question, how is our business fundamentally going to be impacted by climate change, whether that's on the physical risk side or on the transition risk side, through tighter policies and regulation, or changing customer demands and so on, that's causing a lot of focus in that sector, which I think again it's great to see.
Yeah, and I was asking those questions can actually unearth, opportunities for the business as well. I spoke to someone last month of a Swedish-based company, and they looked at what the trends were, the potential impact of climate and societal, wishes, and they saw an opportunity for them to reshape their business, and they're now actually ahead of many others that are starting to wake up to it. So that kind of work actually will unearth not just the risk, but on the flip, if you could look at it the other way, the opportunities for the business to maybe disrupt the industry that they're in, or other industry they could go into.
That's a really great point. And if I may, we had Microsoft speaking at our sustainability reporting performance launch event, and they were talking about how they've evolved from seeing sustainability as a responsibility to being sustainability as an opportunity and a real passion project for their employees. So I think we're in that tipping point. We're in those times now where it's no longer about the risk and the cost of the business. It's about the new markets, new products, new opportunities to become a better business and be a better business, both commercially as well as in terms of the sustainability angle.
Okay, just had a couple of other questions pop through, and one of them is around are there any standards around Scopefree globally? Then I've asked specifically in the United States, and maybe they've joined us early their side. Are you able to share anything? Do you know anything there that could help shed some light, or if not, anywhere they could look to maybe find out the information?
Sure. I mean, I guess the sort of main one in terms of the standards, there are various sort of standards and frameworks for reporting and disclosure. So a couple of things that I'd mentioned there. So number one, the vast majority of kind of corporate reporting uses the greenhouse gas protocol, and that divides Scope 3 into the 15 different categories across upstream and downstream. So that's where the sort of majority of our reporting would typically focus, depending on the specific interests. So if you were looking at, for example, an organizational footprint or a product life cycle assessment, then there is PAS 2060 in the UK. That's a sort of commitment to carbon neutrality. So if you were if you wanted to have, for example, a carbon neutral product, then you might refer to something like that. There isn't an international equivalent of that standard at the moment. The ISO organization is one that we're working with to help develop the equivalent of PAS 2060, but for more of an international kind of audience. So the standards, the methodologies, these are things that are evolving. Certainly happy to maybe pick that question up offline in terms of what might be the right choices for a given organization, but helping clients navigate those different methodologies and those different standards. They are similar in certain respects, but they require different sort of commitments. So there are some considerations there, but there are a lot of different standards and frameworks out there. So again, that's one of the challenges of navigating that technical landscape to make sure that your reporting is robust and accurate.
Maybe I should, the time is right to do a little plug that your guys, you're in the virtual exhibition area. So whoever asked that question, if you want to get further insights, then do visit EcoAct page on that in the exhibition area. Submit your details, and they can obviously follow up and give you some more detailed info. For want of time, there's a question come through, and it's something that I think of myself. A lot of the ambitions and a lot of the impacts and change can come from big corporations, but there are 90% depending on what economy you're in is SME driven. So can we really expect SMEs to make such bold move commitments, especially when when we're recovering from the pandemic? So that's a question I sometimes think, and someone's actually put that through here. So I don't know if you have any thoughts there.
This is a really interesting and important question, because if you look at large businesses that are typically at the forefront of being expected to act on these sorts of issues, their supply chain, their partners will involve the sort of large companies, but also SMEs as well. And the large companies are going to have more resources that they can commit to this kind of action. So on the one hand, kind of acting quickly on climate change issues, you might want to pivot towards more of the large companies, but of course there are many other considerations, the social impacts, the broader economic benefits that we derive from having sort of strong communities of SMEs. So I think there are certainly challenges in there. I think there are various initiatives such as the SME Climate Hub, for example, that are starting to pick up, to focus on what is the right way to engage. I think that there is a responsibility to make it easy for SMEs, so you can't sort of necessarily start by having 110 questions that you're trying to get them to respond to. Again, it's about sort of taking those initial steps and then sort of moving and building from that point. So it's a really interesting and challenging area. I certainly would fully back sort of methods to support SMEs in their journey and creating those sort of collaborative forums around that. But it's all down to engagement ultimately.
Okay, and I'm conscious of time, so maybe I'm going to squeeze in one final question. And before we went, I was talking around nature-based solutions, and how it's going to, tomorrow there's going to be a number of discussions on nature-based solutions, and it's is a key solution in helping us deliver the net zero future. So it'd be great to share some of what you were sharing with me before we went live, how you see it, some of the innovative approaches, and here how it's integrated within the business, not just a silo consideration, how it's being really taken as a central business decision.
Absolutely. We have a nature-based solutions team at EcoAct, which sort of is responsible for the offsetting and the carbon sequestration aspect of that from A to zero journey. We absolutely need nature-based solutions. If we look at the sort of sequestration side of things to achieve those net zero commitments, then that's predominantly more on the sort of natural solution side of things. The technological solutions are more in their development stages, really, and the earlier stages of being sort of commercialized. So we're looking at sort of nature-based solutions, and we're looking at sort of land-based sort of forestry, afforestation, reforestation type projects, but also increasingly around blue carbon. So looking at sort of marine options such as mangroves and seagrasses, which have a significantly higher sort of emission sequestration potential. So there's a number of really great projects out there. I'd sort of make the point that we need to protect our existing carbon sinks. So we need the sort of the offsetting, the conservation, carbon neutral type projects, but we also need the new nature-based solutions to develop new carbon sinks as well through, as I say, land-based and sort of marine options. But again, a really interesting space, and certainly look forward to the discussion tomorrow.
That's great. Well, thank you. Well, I think you've done my job for teeing up tomorrow. But Martin, unfortunately, I'm hearing we are up for time. But firstly, thank you for joining us. Thank you for presenting, and thank you for joining for the Q&A. Some great insights, and hopefully you managed to answer the questions that we got through. But those that still have questions, again, EcoAct are one of our partners on this event, and they have a page in the virtual exhibition area where you can submit details and find out more information. But I want to thank you, Martin, for joining us, and for your team for partnering on this year's event.
Thanks very much for your time. Great to be here.
Take care of yourself. Speak soon.
Cheers, Liam. Thanks. Bye now.
Bye-bye. Okay, well, what a day. It's flown by for me. Some really some interesting discussions. I knew there were going to be interesting discussions, but some great surprises in there for me as well. If you missed any of today's sessions, then do check out our on-demand hub. I know a number of the sessions from this morning are already in there, and a number will be uploaded in the coming hours. And again, do join us tomorrow at 9 a.m. UK time sharp for another day of timely discussions. And we are joined with senior executives from the likes of L'Oreal, UNF, CCC, Philips, Dowd, Tetra Pak, and the International Olympic Committee, to name but a few. And finally, don't keep it to yourself. Share this event with your colleagues, peers. There's a number of sessions that they can access tomorrow. I'm sure we can provide them with some ideas and answers, and I'm hopeful that we did the same for you guys today. With that, I hope you have a lovely day ahead of you. Stay safe, and I look forward to seeing you tomorrow. Take care.